And part of it, I assume Professor Message told you that there's parts about the Spanish flu and Black Plague and how nasty it was. And well, I mean, we read about what it did then, but if we had something, an outbreak like that today, what would it look like? I mean, it's a totally different deal, right? So Abby asked if we could find a guest speaker to come in. This is Dr. Finley Turner. He was a medical doctor here in town for
35 years.
Yeah, long time.
Yep.
I've known him for, I guess, since I was in high school, probably because I married his daughter. But we've asked Dr. Turner to come in and talk to you all from a medical standpoint. We can talk about it from a terrorism standpoint all day, but you really don't. I can't convey that. I'm not a medical doctor, but Dr. Turner has agreed to come talk to you about the medical side of it and what a plague would look like. All right. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right.
I understand y'all pretty well covered the Black Plague and Spanish flu. Quick question. What did you find in your studies about the impact of the Black Plague and the Spanish flu at the time that they occurred? As far as from an economic standpoint, what did it do?
After the fact, it seemed like it almost went into like a Renaissance kind of thing. The economics of each society were, increased almost tenfold. It would seem like just all it did was good for the economy after the fact.
Correct. Yeah, wages went up for the common labor because there weren't any common laborers. They were almost annihilated, and so there was a great shortage of labor. So the middle class did extremely well. The economy actually took off afterwards. I don't think we'd see that today. Black Plague, bubonic plague, as it's called today, about 650 cases a year. About 650 cases a year still that are documented in the world. Today, unlike 1300s and back in the 600s when the bubonic plague hit those times, there were no antibiotics. There are now. But it's such a severe disease. As you probably know, it starts out kind of like the flu, runny nose, coughs, chills, and it grows into something much worse with the hemorrhagic rash, etc. Death rates were up as high as 90% in 1348, 1350 when it was hitting. Today, the death rate, because we have treatment still, if you get the plague, death rate runs around 10%, even with treatment. So it still has a significant impact, and that's why it's used as a biological terrorist agent, because it still has a death rate. Spanish flu, actually, what group of people, just a question, were affected most by the Spanish flu? What age groups? Yours. Young adults died more from Spanish flu than any other age group. It did not seem to bother the elderly. Reason is, the Spanish flu actually hit first in about 1880 to 1890. It was a mild form of the Spanish flu. And so it's kind of what we considered a typical flu for what we get. And all those people that got it became immune. So when they got to 1918, 30 years later, and they're 60 and 70, they have an immunity already built to the Spanish flu. The reason that people died with the Spanish flu is because they had a hyperimmune reaction. You're at an age where your immune system is extremely vigorous. It's very, very good. And what happened, the Spanish flu morphed. It actually hit at the end of World War I, and it hit in July and August. It went through and started out like most flus do. Most flus have a very what we call a virulent type and a milder type. The milder type hit first. But Europe was in a bad place. And the problem with Europe was they were all malnourished. In the trenches, the soldiers in the trenches had dysentery, other problems. They were malnourished. So they were already compromised physically. And so that mild form of flu became a very virulent form of the flu. Now, normally, we don't see much of the virulent forms. I remember a case about 10 years ago here in Russellville, a young guy, about 17 from Atkins, ended up in the hospital on ventilator at Children's with bilateral viral pneumonia because he got the virulent form. People that get the virulent form tend to stay inside. They don't have the strength to get out. They don't intermix. The milder forms, people send their kids to school with the milder forms of the flu. That's how it gets spread. Well, the problem in 1918 was that the virulent form hit finally. It's in the trenches. These people are getting hurt. They're being sent where? Hospitals. They're being sent back to barracks. So they're in place with a lot of people, and it spread rapidly. And it became a problem that devastated Europe in particular and the United States. The death rates were quite high. 500,000 to 2 million people died, according to some estimates. They think the estimates are under, most estimates are under because they didn't get to all the people that died from the flu. They don't know that they got to them. So what would happen today? Well, the problem is we're not worried so much about the Spanish flu today. There would be some resistance because actually the H5N1 flus have hit and probably there's quite a bit of resistance. Off the topic question. When Europeans came to the New World, what basically wiped out the Native Americans? Smallpox. Smallpox doesn't even exist anymore. And we're really much more worried about smallpox, probably as a terrorist push, than, say, Spanish flu. Because how many of you in here have ever had a smallpox vaccination? None, right? No, I've got my scar from when I was a kid, but then I'm ancient. But smallpox has practically been eradicated as a disease. In fact, most of the cases of smallpox that now occur in the laboratory. They don't really occur out. Now, they have had a few outbreaks in Africa, but not worldwide and it's not an extensive outbreak. About 10 years ago, we were quite concerned about the Asian bird flu. I don't know if you remember. You probably wouldn't because you were probably too young to care. But at one time, about 10 years ago, there was an outbreak amongst chicken farmers in China of a very virulent flu. And the United States became quite concerned, and we set up pandemic committees across the United States. Each county had a pandemic committee. The state had a pandemic committee. I served on those, and the whole plan was, what do we do if a pandemic hits? How do we handle it? Our estimate at that time was if that particular flu hit the United States, the death rates could be as high as 30 to 40%. Number one, because we had no vaccine for it at the time. So we couldn't immunize people for the flu, for that particular flu. Number two, the things that happen when a pandemic hits are going to be so beyond what we're capable of really handling that it's going to be catastrophic. Let me give you an idea. The problem with the flu, as you may well know, is number one, it causes this superimmune reaction, which causes an inflammatory response in the lungs. So the virus itself can cause pulmonary edema, it can cause pneumonia, but the real devastating thing is that it causes a lot of secondary bacterial infections, bacterial pneumonias. The problem is those particular pneumonias are going to require assistance. People will be so weak, they'll require assistance with breathing to get through the pneumonia. Usually someone with a pneumonia of a viral type is on a ventilator for as long as a week or more if they survive. I think we have at St. Mary's 4 ventilators. Okay, we're talking about 4 ventilators at St. Mary's Hospital for a population of 30,000 people, 30% of whom may have need of a ventilator at some point. And it's not going to be, we're going to have the flu over 2 years. We're going to have the flu hit, and it's going to be over 3 to 4 months. Everybody's going to get it that's going to get it probably within a 3 to 4 month period. So the demands on the medical facilities will be high. We anticipate that hospitals and clinics will have to shut their doors because they can't handle the demand. We also anticipate that it'll take the presence of police, National Guard, to control the crowds at hospitals and clinics to keep them from trying to break in. And the problem is, you're sick, you feel terrible, you want treatment, and there really is no treatment for the flu. They talk about taking, you see ads on TV for taking, if you get the flu, take this within the first 24 hours. It doesn't keep you from getting the flu because you've already got it. All it does is shorten the course of the flu by about 24 hours. So if you're going to have the flu for 5 days, if you take this medicine, you'll have it for 4. And you'll wonder why you took it when you get through. You'll bless it while you're taking it and wonder why you took it after you're done. We're estimating, let's say we've got a population of 30,000 here. 30% death rate, 30%. That's 9,000 people. 9,000 people. Where are we going to put 9,000 bodies? Refrigerator trucks. There's no morgue at the hospital. It will take refrigerator trucks, and the funeral industry will basically just have to shut down because who's going to a funeral? I mean, who will go to a funeral if this is what's going on all over the place? Economically, factories will close. You won't see anybody out. And we're going to have a lot of these deaths we're not going to know about because older people, if they get the flu, will get so weak they can't get out. And unless somebody's checking on them regularly, they're going to die in their homes. And as soon as the pandemic kind of slows down, what we've seen in Houston and in Florida with dogs going door to door to find people, that'll be happening in our communities to try to find people who have died during the flu. Now, all that being said, it will take months to years for the medical system to recover. Because number one, it's going to eliminate 30% of all medical workers because they're going to get it. And it's going to kill 30% of all physicians, all nurses, all techs, all therapists. It's going to kill that many because they're having to deal with people that are still spreading the flu. And it's going to be a virulent form when it happens. This is speculation, but it's speculation based on what is probably going to be real. Now, when does it happen? Who knows? It's kind of like, when does the next big earthquake hit? I mean, it's going to happen, but we don't know when. It'll take years and years. Economy-wise, it'll take quite a while because we are going to lose all our labor force. When you lose 30% of the middle class, and the middle class is already small compared to what it has been in the past. When you lose 30% of the middle class, people that make the government, that make this country run, are going to disappear. It will take a while to train people and replace the people that are gone. So the economy as a whole is going to be impacted by that. Output, production is going to go down. However, salaries will go up. I mean, it's not what you want to do is wish for a pandemic so you can get a raise, but that's what's going to happen. As far as new industries, there'll be a bunch. We're already projecting that in the next 20 years, 80 or 75 to 80% of the jobs as we know them are going to disappear. Simply because of technology and the things that we're moving on with. I mean, Wilson teaches classes on drones. What would we have known about drones 6 years ago? I mean, that's how fast technology is moving. So there's going to be new fields that are going to open up. Openings with lots of opportunity. One of the fields that's going to open up will have to do with security, basically at a new level, because security then will begin to focus on how do we secure ourselves in the face of pandemic, not just catastrophe, not buildings falling in, people. The building structures, tech will look just like it does. There just won't be any people here. The building structures will be in place. Everything will be in place to do what we need to do. We just won't have the people to teach. We won't have the people to take care of a student body this size because 30% of them are going to be gone. I mean, the economic opportunities later will be significant for people coming out that are immune now to whatever that flu was. The problem is, when does the next pandemic hit? When does the next hurricane hit? When does the next earthquake hit? Always something. Any questions so far? What did y'all find out about economics at that time that you can apply to today? Well, one of the things that happened then, is there will be burial units. Where our society we honor our dead, and we do that through funerals, memorial services, etc. Memorial services and funerals probably won't happen at the time of death because getting people together is not going to be a good idea. Tech probably would close down. The schools will close because, for one thing, high school age kids, college age people, you all are going to be really susceptible to this thing. And so there's going to be no way they're going to let this place stay open. Tech will become, based on the county's plan, a holding place for people with the flu. They'll take the gym and there'll be cots and cots. There's pictures from the Spanish flu of airport hangars with nothing but rows of cots of people with Spanish flu. And so they put everybody with the virulent flu in one spot. And the only people they're infecting that way are the people taking care of them and themselves. It will be crime rate. It will go up during this flu because, unfortunately, the population will be unable to protect itself. They won't be able to even get to the door hardly, particularly the elderly if it attacks. Crime rate will go up. Police will be subjected to exposure. You'll see a lot of people that are in public service, and I hate to say this, but they'll disappear. If you look at Katrina in the New Orleans Police Department, when Katrina hit, a large percentage of those people disappeared. They were gone. And the same thing's going to happen. That's just human nature. That's not evil. That's just the nature of the beast, so to speak. So crime goes up, economy improves, death rate goes up. The other problem you're going to see is food production. Food production will go down because they don't have anybody to work the fields. There's no harvest. There's nobody putting out the different chemicals and fertilizers and things that they need for production. So the concern is that it could go out. How many of you have seen or watched The Last Ship? That's a show, the whole premise of it is built on a pandemic that eliminates 90% of the world's population. But in that, the virus attacks food crops, and it could, depending on what kind of virus, and it destroys a lot of the food crops in addition to killing people. If that happens, if we were to have a pandemic that destroys not just humans, but also destroys food sources, then you really are running into a problem. And there are viruses and bacteria that destroy food crops. So the outlook looks kind of bleak. I think a modern pandemic won't be quite like the ones we saw with Black Death and with the Spanish flu. The real concern is that a modern pandemic is going to be such a hybrid bug that it's going to be very, very difficult to deal with, and may well be intentionally spread. The Black Death was spread because of rats on ships. Okay. Now the pandemic is going to be spread because of rats in airplanes, human rats, and they're going to be spreading Black Death in the form of another kind of virus. We'll have another Black Death kind of thing. It won't be bubonic plague, but it'll be viral. It's not going to be, I don't think it'll be bacterial. A bacterial plague or pandemic can be stopped because we have antibiotics. It'll have effect, but like I say, like with the bubonic plague, 10% death rate, that's nothing compared to what it was in Europe back in the 1300s. Any questions so far?
Do you think there are places where some organizations could actually engineer a virus to do like what you're saying into a form that can be used as a weapon?
Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. They can already do that. You look at the influenza and it's an RNA strand. What happens with the flu? Look at last year. What was the effectiveness rate of the influenza vaccine? 40%. It only stopped 40% of people that got the vaccine from getting the flu. And why is that? Well, you have to understand how we go about getting our influenza vaccine. The CDC monitors influenza. Influenza is going on all over the world at all times, and we monitor it. The CDC monitors it all over the world to look at what are the more virulent forms that are out there, where they are, and what the likelihood of them showing up. Your vaccine this year is going to have, as usual, 2 type A flus and 1 type B. One of the ones they're going to protect is against a flu that's been particularly virulent in Australia this year, this past summer, which was their winter. So we're going to be vaccinated for what's basically the Australian flu, I guess they'll call it that, because that's where the worst form of flu's been in the past 12 months. Now the problem is, they base that on cultures of the RNA virus that they make. You cough, how many viral particles do you spread when you cough one or sneeze one time? 500,000. Okay, so all I got to do is cough, and this room's pretty well hit. But the problem with within something like influenza, which is an RNA strand, it can change. So it can make itself resistant to the new vaccine. So it's the same virus, but it's a little different. And that's what happens to the flu. The flu morphs so often that it's very, very difficult actually to stop it completely. That's why it was only 40% effective this last year. It changed a little bit, and it made itself a little more resistant to the vaccine, or the antibodies that you got from the that you formed from the vaccine were not effective against it. Only 40% of the time. And so that's the other problem. That's the difficulty with the flu. If we get a pandemic due to something like the flu, we can get a vaccine and inoculate a great deal of the population. But with a virulent form of the flu, it may change enough that the vaccine's ineffective. And then you've got to come up with a new vaccine and a new vaccine. And it's a constant chase after a very virulent form. That's why I say it's not treatable. There is no medicine I can give as a physician to stop the flu. The only thing I can do is immunize folks and try to get them to where they have antibodies to stop the attack. Well, it takes a lot to produce the amount of vaccine we need in this country. In fact, every year we don't have enough vaccine to give. It's very costly. And so even if a flu hits, remember I said it hit and it'd be through here in 3 to 4 months. It will take 3 to 4 months to get a vaccine. So it won't help us if it hits here, because we'll be able to help the people that get a vaccine because of the people that died here. And yes, that can be done in the laboratory and is done. That's one of the major concerns with some of these groups that have access to high-tech labs, because they're going to be able possibly to produce an influenza that we haven't seen in a very virulent form. They're going to be able to possibly get hold of a smallpox. And, you know, there is live smallpox. I don't know if you saw on the news about 6 months ago, they lost track of a live smallpox sample. And that was a major nationwide problem. They spent millions of dollars trying to track down the sample. And then, let's see, about 4 months ago, they found live smallpox in a tray they'd forgotten about at the CDC. They put it up, and it'd been up for about 20 years, and it was still virulent. And it's not something you can play with. I mean, if you watch these people go into work with smallpox, if they're going in to work with that particular sample, they are totally suited up. Air's connected by hose to the outside, so they're breathing outside air, nothing inside. There is no exposure to smallpox because, like I say, we don't immunize this country against smallpox anymore. And it's a very deadly disease. But yes, we're capable. DNA and RNA, just to give you an idea, because of the DNA and RNA research that's being done, our understanding of medicine doubles every 2 years. Doubles. And most of it's in DNA, RNA studies.
Do you think there will ever be a point where that we reach a ceiling in creating medicine and viruses reinforce themselves to the point that we can't combat them anymore?
Well, you know, I don't know. Viruses, it's certainly possible with bacteria. We've proven that. If you look at strep throat, for example, when we came out with penicillin, you gave somebody 100,000 units of penicillin in the butt cheek and they were cured. Now we give 2 million units and it's resistant. And we have to give other medicines instead sometimes. So bacteria have already proven to us that we are capable of morphing bacteria. And that's why you see physicians nowadays, if you come in with a virus, we want you to not take medicine. Sounds terrible. But if I give you an antibiotic for a virus, number one, it doesn't work because an antibiotic's not going to touch a virus. And you talk about things on TV like you see the ads for chicken that's antibiotic free. Well, all chicken's antibiotic free now, just about. The reason for that is every time a new antibiotic came out, big companies like Tyson's would put that antibiotic into the chicken feed to take care of their chickens. It made a lot of bacteria resistant to our new antibiotics. So our new antibiotics were ineffective as they were rolling out because we were doing things that allowed the bacteria to change. Do we hit a ceiling? I don't think it's ever going to be where we can't, but I think it's going to be where it's going to be really difficult to come up with something that is effective. That's why the flu, basically the best treatment's bed rest, fluids, that kind of thing. I can give you, the only thing I can give you are antivirals. They're very expensive. They usually are IV. They take a lot of work. You look at Bill Gates and what his foundation's done. You know, one of their desires is to get rid of AIDS in Africa, where it's fairly endemic. I mean, in some parts of Africa, AIDS is involved in 50% of the population in the AIDS virus. And the Gates Foundation pays for the antivirals to give those people. Now, if you've got to be a 75 billionaire to do that, there's not a lot of us that are going to do that, okay? But that's what it's going to take to really go after things. It's a lot of money, a lot of resources. The field of medicine is not going to go away because there's always going to be illness, there's always going to be sickness, and unfortunately there's always going to be man's inhumanity to man, and that's part of it. Any other questions?
What would you say would be like the biggest kind of disease that would be a threat in our modern day?
Anything that causes your pulmonary or cardiac system to malfunction. I mean, you basically have to think about it. I have ALS. That's why I'm in a wheelchair. My legs don't work. I live fine without my legs. I'm not going to live fine if I don't have lungs or if my heart goes, okay? Dementia is another thing that if they find something that attacks the brain, like encephalitis, things like that, those are things that not only are going to, with encephalitis, the problem that you'll have with some of these pandemics is that not only will you lose a large part of the population, but you'll also have a percentage of the population that will require long-term care. And so now you're going to have a lot of the population devoted to taking care of people who can't care for themselves. And that's going to be very costly as well, because that's going to pull more people out of production, manufacturing, things like that. So anytime you disable a population, you impact that population significantly economically, because you're basically pulling people out of the workforce to take care of people who can't care for themselves. I don't think we have, if you hit the hardest person to take care of, for example, in a nursing home, is someone who has dementia. Because it's hard to direct them. You can't help them sometimes with direction. If somebody hit us with an epidemic or pandemic that caused a robust encephalitis, we'd be in deep trouble because we really have inadequate places to take care of those people, and the government could not afford to pay for caregivers in the homes of literally millions of homes. So it would have to be a communal type thing, and there just aren't enough of them to handle an encephalitis pandemic. That would scare me more as much as anything. Pulmonary pneumonias, we call it in medicine the old man's best friend, because pneumonia is usually deadly in old people. It's something you can't overcome. Number one, you lose the power of your muscles, the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles to breathe. Secondly, the pulmonary structure itself gets blocked and plugged with mucus, and the air sacs themselves begin to degrade and break down. And so the oxygen exchange can't take place. You can't bring in enough air or exhale enough air to let the oxygen exchange take place. It causes congestive heart failure, right-sided, which leads to left-sided heart failure, which leads to swelling, edema, all other kinds of problems. And so pulmonary and vascular problems are the things that we see the most with most of these things that are pandemics. The lungs are the ones that get hit the most. Vision's also something else. If you look at some of these, some like smallpox, some of these viruses, some of these bacteria attack the eyes as well. And that's going to be difficult if that happens. But I think we can deal with that a lot easier than we can with some of these others. Pulmonary, we don't have the facilities, we don't have the mechanisms to deal with all the problems you can get into in the pulmonary structures. I mean, like I say, we got 4 ventilators at the hospital, and we got 9,000 people with a very virulent flu. We can't handle it. And people are going to be fighting out in the streets to get one of those ventilators.
In terrorism and in homeland security, I talk a lot about using ricin or anthrax or some sort of chemical agent to drop it and kill people in a football stadium. Super Bowl is the biggest event of the nation every year.
Right.
And that's pretty reasonable to think that we could get those type of agents to spread.
Well, they spread pretty quick. Anthrax is an interesting one too, because that's an inhalant. And the problem with anthrax is exactly what we were talking about. Because it's an inhalant, it causes a hemorrhagic pneumonia. I mean, it goes straight to the lung, and it causes a hemorrhagic pneumonia, and it's deadly. It is super deadly. Is there an antibiotic? Yep, there is. But you got to know what you're dealing with. And we're going to lose a lot of people before we figure out what we've been hit with.
Is it reasonable to think that we could do the same thing and deliver an agent like Spanish flu or plague?
Well, Wilson, I'd say that if somebody's working on it, we're working on it.
Right.
You know, so yes, I'd say that.
Is it a bad enough pandemic that it would work? Does that make sense? Does it?
Well, yeah, the problem's going to be this, you know, let's look at Ebola. Best example I can give. Ebola is in Africa, a small part of Africa, okay? And it generally doesn't spread out of that small part of Africa. But this last big surge of Ebola, we lost, 3 people in the United States? It got here. Why? Because we've got healthcare workers that are going over there to help those people, and they get infected. They come back. They don't know they've been infected. One lady was a nurse at a hospital in Houston, you know, and she went to work. Well, that's the worst place to go if you're carrying Ebola around. I will sit right here and tell you one of the most unhealthy places you can go is your local hospital. So if you get sick and have to go to the hospital, you want to get well in a hurry because you want out of there. I mean, that's not, we've got, every hospital in the country has the same problem. You have, how many resistant bacteria do you have in a hospital? A lot, because that's where all the drugs are. That's where all the antibiotics are. We give them IV all the time. There are IVs hanging with antibiotics everywhere. Bugs everywhere just being challenged, and they're changing because of it. So one of our big problems now across the country is streptococcal resistance that gets into the bloodstream. Streptococcal pneumonia is horrific. It causes cavitary lesions in the lung, hemorrhagic lesions in the lung. It just eats up the lung when it gets in there. So, yeah, it's somebody's capable. I would say we're capable. Ethically, I don't think this country would use it. I think we study it because we know it can be used, and we really do want to know what's out there and what's going to come and what we might be able to do for it. I can blow up a bomb in a mall and kill 30, 40 people. I can drop some kind of inhalant in a stadium and start a pandemic that might kill millions. That's the difference. One strike with a bomb and it kills those in the vicinity. One strike with an inhalant form of a virus, that can spread to millions because it's not going to be contained in the area. It's going. Once those doors to that building open, it's out.
Any more questions? Going once, going twice. Dr. Turner, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure.
You're amazing.
Yes, always. Yeah. Thank you.